Welcome to Jesus On, a look at today's issues from an eternal perspective. Pastor Zack and Pastor John will be giving us biblical insight into some of the problems the world faces today. Sit back and listen as we hear Jesus On, the problems you're dealing with right now.
Hey, welcome to Jesus On. My name is Zack, and this next to me is Amy. Amy works with our women's ministry, some of our girls' children's ministry, and you invest in my daughter, so I'm super grateful for that, and also worship ministry, among other things. We are doing an episode, Jesus on the past, the present, and the future. Yes. And we're just going to do today, Jesus on the past. We all have a past. So let's start there. Let's talk about what is powerful about our past and why is it important for us to think about or approach our past?
Well, our past is important because we weren't just dropped into this space in time and history. We were brought here through a past and really through other people's pasts. We all have a family with a past. And that has shaped us and molded us and brought us to this point of where you are at in your life. And so it's important to acknowledge that. There may be some hard things. Maybe there were some great things that happened, but maybe you have a great past. Maybe you think about that a lot, like how great the past was. Maybe you don't like thinking about that a lot, and it brings a lot of shame and guilt. But wherever you're coming from, you came from a past. You have one. We all do.
Our past has brought us to the place that we're at. Why is it so? Why are our pasts important? What would you say about that?
Well, I'd say they're important because they do shape how we see things now, and they shape how we approach God and how we approach each other. And it's important to know that God was there in your past, and he was the one orchestrating everything to bring you up to this point in your life. And there are things there that if we take the time to look back at it, that we can see him moving and working and showing how good he is through all of it.
We could take two different approaches. We go, oh, my past defines me because it brought me to where I'm at. Or we could take the approach of, my past is my past. It's past me. I'm focused on the future. So totally ignoring it. The other side of the spectrum is it defines you. What's the danger of either side of those ditches?
Yes. So let's look at the first one. If you look and you say, oh, the past is behind me, you take the Timon and Pumbaa way, if you will, Hakuna Matata, put the past behind you sort of situation.
I like what you did there.
You could take that approach, but then you run into a real danger, and we can see that danger in many places in the Bible, but it's really, really evident in the book of Judges when the people of Israel, they've been brought out of Egypt. They've gone through the Red Sea that God parted. He's fed them manna, bread from heaven. He's brought them quail. He's helped them defeat enemies, and the list goes on and on and on, and how good he was to bring them to the promised land, the place that he had promised that they would live and flourish. And under the leader of Joshua, they come, they settle the land, but here's where it gets tricky. They forget their past. It says that the people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders in Judges chapter 2. And all the elders that outlived him, who had seen all of the great things that the Lord had done for Israel, those things that I was just telling you about. And then Joshua, son of Nun, a servant of the Lord, he died at the age of 110. They buried him. And then after that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, after they passed away, all the generation of the past, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And from that's Judges chapter 2. The rest of the book of Judges is them spiraling just deeper and deeper, farther away from God, deeper into evil practices. And it's because they didn't take time to think about their past and to pass it on to the next generation, the things that they'd learned, the things that they had seen God do. And it was forgotten.
Yeah, forgot all the works of God. I think that speaks into how nuanced and complex our past is. You made this comment of like, it's not just our past, but other people's past that intersect with us. And you just gave an example from Judges where it wasn't just the people's past, it was their parents' past, it was their grandparents' past. And if you read the book of Judges, like you said, it literally gets worse and worse and
Yes.
worse and worse. And it's funny how like we think of some of the people in the book of Judges as like these biblical heroes, like, oh, Samson. Samson was horrible. He was not a hero we should model our life after. Like he had a moment of good repentance. The rest was a wreck. But I think that speaks to when we ignore not just our past, but the past that our parents or grandparents, like we talked about this before recording of, I'm reading this book about family systems theory, but it's this idea that when you counsel someone and you're like, oh, they have this problem in their marriage where they just don't know how to communicate. And so we treat that problem, but the reality is that's really not the person's problem. That's just the symptom of it. And if you go to the root of that problem, it's because of, their parents didn't know how to communicate, etc.
It could go generations back.
It's generation. And I was talking with Amy, talking with you about this before, about how one of the things I did one time, and more people I found done a genogram where you list out your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, and you just start listing these significant moments of their life, whether it's divorce or marriage or having kids or a child dies or a mental illness or all of these different things. And you start seeing patterns showing up in your past that might, if you're not careful enough, shape your future. And to me, that's the power of our past, that if we don't pay attention to it, it can actually negatively shape our future. And then we talked about this other side of, you can ignore your past and miss out how it could really affect your future, or we can let it define us.
That's right.
And how it can lead to shame. And let's go here. So we talked about the importance of the past, why it's important, and how it's powerful. What does Jesus have to say about the past? How can Jesus and how he lived and what he said, how can it shape the way that we think about and respond to our own past?
Well, it's important to remember that Jesus was there from the beginning. John opens his gospel by saying, Jesus, the Word, was there from the beginning of time. So we know that he knows our past. He was there in our past. But it's important to remember, especially if you're coming from a place of feeling shame about your past, that he does not use your past to throw it in your face or to shame you, to pile on to that shame and regret that you might feel about your past. And fortunately, the Bible's not just full of times where we see people forgetting God. The Bible's also full of times where Jesus comes to people, he meets them in the place where they are, where they're feeling this shame about their past, and he takes it and he redeems it and makes it so that they do have hope for a good future. And we see that in the story of the woman at the well, for example. She comes, Jesus asks her for water, and she's talking to him about water, and it comes up that, okay, I have this water that will make you never thirsty again. She says, I want that. He says, okay, go get your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. And he says, you're right. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. And he does not bring that up. It'd be easy to stop there and say, okay, that's a really uncomfortable moment. Yeah. Why did he throw that in her face? He wasn't throwing it in her face. He was saying, I know your past, and I'm still here offering this to you. I see who you are, where you came from, how you've been shaped, and I'm offering this to you because it is good, and it is better than what you can do on your own. And she takes it as that, seeing, okay, he knows my past. She went into her town saying, I met a man who knew everything about me, and not, man, what a meanie, he threw it all in my face. No, he offered me something better, and you can have it too.
Yeah.
So this woman who had shame in her past, that past was taken and redeemed and redirected to a way that could then proclaim how good God is and how he is for everyone. And Zach, I know you brought up another really great example of how Jesus takes someone's past and redeems it as well.
I mean, I love the story of Peter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how bad is denying Jesus to a middle school girl? Like on the night of his betrayal, and the guilt and the shame that Peter felt. You could see how this moment was on its way of defining his whole life. And I think that's something to be said. There are a lot of people that have something that in their past that is defining who they are right here, right now, and is defining their present and their future. And what Jesus does is he comes to Peter and says, you don't have to let your past define you.
Yes.
Surrender to me, and I will give you a new and better hope and future, a new and better present and future. And I love that story. You can read it at length in John 21, where Jesus restores Peter. And he basically says to Peter, you don't have to let this define you. I'm not going to let it define you, but you don't have to. And here's what's powerful to me is it's not as if when we surrender to Jesus, he takes out an eraser and erases our past like it never existed. What he does is he takes the shambles of it and he builds it he redeems it.
Yes.
This just came to mind. I'm going to forget this. Oh, man. But I'll describe it. So in Chinese culture, maybe you know what this is, where...
Are we talking about pottery?
Pottery, where
it's Japanese culture.
Japanese,
yes.
But where it's broken. It's broken, but they mend it with gold.
Yes.
And what is that called? Do you know what is that called?
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's beautiful.
It is, and it's, so it's these plates or it's these pieces of pottery where they're broken, but they're mended with gold, and it makes it even more beautiful.
Y'all, when you have a second, Google it.
Yeah, totally. We're gonna be like,
look at it.
That's what it
Yes.
was. It's Japanese.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for correcting me on that. And I think that's what Jesus does for us, is he takes the brokenness of us, and when we surrender to him and let him define us rather than our past define us, he takes the cracks of our lives and he fills them in with gold, and it's for our good and it's for his glory. And that's what I love about what Jesus does with our past. He doesn't get an eraser and erases it. He will take it and he will use it for your good and his glory.
That's right.
Let's end here. What should we do with our past?
It's a really good question, because like we've been saying the whole time, we all have one. We know that if we ignore it, it does not lead to things going well. So I like to think of it as we need to remember the past, but not dwell there. And when we remember it, it's not like we're rehashing or sitting in shame. That would be just kind of dwelling in the past, or even like, hey, look how cool I am. We know that Paul was he called himself the Hebrew of Hebrews. He did things right all the way through his life. He could look at his past and he could say, like, oh, well, my past speaks for itself. Like, look how cool I am and how far it got me. But he doesn't tell us to do that. He tells us to forget the past and to strive towards what's ahead. And I don't think that he forgot, though, that God was good to him and that God called him to something new and better. And that's the same thing that God does for us. It's what he did for the people of Israel. He called them into something new and better. And that calling happened in our past. So we want to remember things that God did. We want to remember how he worked our past for good.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't want to do is to sit and dwell in that without remembering what God has done.
Yeah, don't let it define you.
Yeah.
That's a good word. I mean, what comes to mind as we talk about this is just surrender your past to Jesus and let him redeem it for the present and the future. There's people who might listen to this and they've had an affair, or they've had a divorce, or they really blew it as a parent and now they got a prodigal child. And we could go down the list, got fired from a job, or, they got thrown in jail. Yeah, just go on and on and on. And even things like that, Jesus, when we surrender to him, he will mend that with gold. And it does not have to define you.
That's right.
And that's amazing. So I hope this episode encouraged you. I hope above all it would just remind us this is what Jesus does. Jesus heals us of our brokenness that's in the past and calls us to a new and better present and future. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next episode.